Shit was fucked up, and somehow we made our way.
Too many leaders were already passed and were unable to tell their stories firsthand. Our community includes survivors of the Stonewall riots who have been fighting for gender diverse equality for over 50 years.
They were loading the transsexuals into the van to take them to the police department. And one of the trans accidentally kicked a police officer. So he jumped into the paddy wagon with his billy stick, and he started beating her in the head with his billy stick. That's when the people standing around started reacting to someone being beaten up by a police officer who was sworn to serve the people, not just some people, but all the people. See, in reality, our community has always been overlooked.
Because what happened when I was born was that my mom was a nurse, so she certainly had been around to see a lot of kids born. My father was a worker on a truck. He was not a particularly sophisticated guy, didn't go to college. Smart, but didn't have that kind of education. So when I was born and I was delivered, what happened is that the doctor, had me in their hands, and my mother saw all the nurses who were around the edge of the room kind of do this. They'll look down. So my mom knew there was something wrong at the birth immediately. And that's an important moment because parents are either excited about the birth announcement or they're terrified by the birth announcement. So what I'm told is that they told me that they needed to do some tests on me, and they took me out of the room. So instead of being laid on my mother's chest, which would be typical for a new birth, this baby was taken out of the room, and everybody got very worried about it. So clearly my genitals were mixed in appearance, and I didn't have a full male look or a full female look. It took me a lot of years to get the records to find out what things actually looked like, but I eventually did.
As a Black trans woman, in regards to some of the things that I had to go to, or we Black trans women had to go through our childhood, starts at home. Your family, your friends, your classmates, people at school. It was just harsh. I had to fight, physically fight, and I still am against fighting, but I had to physically fight growing up. Didn't know why at first, but the fact that I was different. And I think that's where it starts, and that's where we need to tackle that at, more with the parents and people in neighborhoods and stuff like that. But those were mainly most of the challenges where I had to fight. I was isolated because of that. I couldn't go to like football games and feel safe, very unsafe anywhere,
I only knew of one person who was living his life as a male. But again, there was no name. There was no, I'm a trans man or anything like that there. I called him Pops. He called me son. His name was Marvin Roberts. And he was a double amputee. And I met him in church. And I went up to him and I was like, what is it like to just be able to be you? He wasn't transitioning. He was just being himself. He said people started calling him sir, and he just kind of went with it.
Tammy was another person, really began her efforts in the 1990s. She had been born a man, and she'd gone into the service. She'd had a child. She was raped at Fort Leonard Wood, and she had the PTSD, realized she was transgender, and made her transition and wound up in Las Vegas. Well, she was a veteran, and she was the first that I'm aware of who actually took on the Veterans Administration as a transgender person to make sure that the Veterans Administration took care of transgender service people. Now, she got involved with a number of organizations. She began involved with a transgender component of the community counseling center in Las Vegas in the early 90s. And she was back and forth with the Veterans Administration, frequently trying to get herself taken care of. But at the same time, she set up, by sheer chutzpah, badgering the hell out of them for every opportunity she got to set up within the Veterans Administration in Las Vegas a component for transgender servicemen. And they did. They didn't do it entirely willingly, and it was a fight for her every step of the way, but she did establish this group, and they met and they fought to have their medical needs met by the government organization that was obligated by law to take care of them. And in transgenders' cases, often were not. And in fact, she and the others in the group often put up with a great deal of harassment, where they would deliberately alter their service records to read the gender that they'd been born in, the sex they'd been born with, instead of what they were now. They would, 100 little irritating barbs over and over all the time, and they withstood it, and Tammy Pickett withstood it, and she got her way, and she got her way for others. And she was involved with the center. She was involved with a number of other small organizations, turnabouts, for example. And when she finally left Las Vegas, this would have been in the early 2000s, I think, she was satisfied that she had been able to establish a precedent for the veterans, transgender veterans. And ever after, the good that she did then is still carried out now by the administration.
My dad, he ran casinos, and he was told to not have shows with drag queens in the 60s and 70s because they were just not acceptable, and that was not okay for the Vegas, aesthetic, that wasn't really okay.
They were just getting started. Now, this was the height of the AIDS epidemic. And there was really nothing out here. I was here when they had their first Pride Parade.
So, here I am, I'm this little kid, and I'm trying to hide myself from everybody who I ever come in contact with. So that secrecy and shaming is an incredibly important part of what it means to be born intersex. At the time, they didn't have the term intersex. And when I look at the medical records that I was able to get, the titling there is male pseudohermaphrodite hypospadias, right, which is all this medical terminology, most of which isn't used anymore.
Being a Black trans woman in America means you're far more likely than most people to experience serious roadblocks and harms in the form of everything from extreme poverty to violent murder. There are shocking disparities. 41% of Black trans people have been homeless, more than 5 times the general population. 34% have household incomes less than $10,000, more than 8 times the general population. And nearly half of the Black trans population has attempted suicide. Black trans people in the Las Vegas community are at significant risk, not only because of their transition, but because of the obstacles they face culturally as well.
When I moved to Las Vegas, beginning of life was easy. Money was extremely easy because of the lifestyle of prostituting, what we were, I wouldn't say forced to be into, but we found some type of belonging with other girls. So it was a good thing, was get to meet and hang out with other girls like me.
I want to be me. Period. I'm not a trans female. I'm not a girl. I'm not a boy. I'm Roxy.
So my experience in this journey around supporting gender diverse youth began with my own child. Really prior to that becoming my own life experience, there really wasn't any situations where this impacted me in my life. So, my daughter was, she was born when, and I believed her to be my son. And I, was born in raised in a family with, that was Hispanic, and there was a lot of expectations about what it meant to be a boy, and what, what a boy should be doing and how they should behave. And I was getting a lot of pressure from my brothers because she was so feminine at such a young age. And her dad wasn't around because we had divorced when she was just right after she was born. And so there was a lot of focus on her not conforming to the standards that people thought that she should as a boy. As she started growing up, it became more and more clear. She was voicing from the age of 4 that she was a girl, and I was scared and didn't really know how to address those things. And I loved her and wanted to do the right thing. And I think often as parents, we blame ourselves and think that we must have done something.
Transgender people come from all walks of life. We are parents, siblings, and children. We are your coworkers, your neighbors, and your friends. We are 7-year-old children and 70-year-old grandparents. We are a diverse community representing all racial and ethnic backgrounds, as well as all faith and religious beliefs. The word transgender or trans is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity is different from the sex assigned to them at birth. No one makes you transgender. You are trans just like someone who is left-handed or right-handed, or someone who is blonde or brunette. It is not a sexual orientation. It just is who you are.
A primary supervisor is a celebrated, I guess he'd call himself a gay man in these communities for decades, and acted again. There are a lot of hierarchies, right, in counseling. You're a student, you have to do what the teachers tell you, or the professors. You're an intern, you have to do what your supervisors tell you. You don't have a license, you have to do what the board tells you. There are all of these kinds of steps that you have to go through that are very threatening. And I knew already that I was a threat to these things because just me, my person, I shouldn't exist. I challenge orthodoxy and just again in my person. So this person, Ron Lawrence, refused to sign paperwork again in different ways, yell and scream and call me names, got me in a lot of trouble with a lot of other people. And I learned right away that to challenge the kind of the established authority, even within marginalized communities and groups, is to be an outcast or to be excluded.
Traditional Italians, it was not, you wouldn't want to come out back then to anybody. You would be ostracized from your family. You would be kicked out. You would, nobody wanted you around. It was definitely, if you were gay, it would probably be very scary times.
Not a lot of Mexican families are still open to being gay. Like, for example, my family, I guess I could say that. Even though I am the way I am, we don't really talk about it. We kind of just let it be. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I started wearing, girl clothes, or if I started wearing boy clothes, my parents would just be like, oh, okay, we don't really talk about it. And I feel like that's another thing with Mexican families, or just Hispanic families in general. Sometimes they don't even want to talk about it. They just kind of want to just let it be, let it slide. We won't talk about that. Do you know what I mean?
Well, the arts community, as we used to be referred to, it's the place where people who don't fit in go, right? But as we know, there's some fantastic research out there about people who are part of what are called target groups, people who are discriminated against. People who are in groups that are discriminated against tend to discriminate against each other just as badly as the surrounding community does. So the mainstreamers who are punishing us teach us how to punish ourselves and the people who are different than us but are also like us. And it's sad that psychology is so powerful. But when you already are coming from a weak ego state where you don't feel good about yourself, you'll push yourself up in almost any way you possibly can when you're desperate to feel better about yourself. So yeah, I lived through the history of gay men not wanting lesbians in their bars and saying, this is men's space, women can't be here. I lived through the beginning of HIV and, well, the beginning of the AIDS crisis, and watching so many young men getting so sick so fast and dying so quickly, and reaching out to the lesbian community and sitting with lesbian leaders who looked right at me and said, this is a man's problem. We don't want anything to do with it. So that's the nature of prejudice. That's what happens. For the gay male community and for the lesbian community, intersex people are, the same as they are for anybody else. It's like they're different, they're freakish, they have scars in places that they don't want to see scars.
I refuse to be silent about inclusion, and people wanted me to be silent about inclusion because they were representing themselves as like leaders who were inclusive, and then I would call them out in public, in the media, and at various gatherings, social gatherings, and it upset the apple cart. So I stepped way back. It
was a book called Man and Woman, Boy and Girl, and it was written by a guy named John Money. He was the preeminent researcher in looking at intersex differences at that time. He was working at a place called Johns Hopkins, which I didn't know about, which was out in Baltimore. And after I completed my degree in psychology at UCLA, Stoller got me an internship when I was in grad school trying to get my PhD to work with John Money out of Johns Hopkins, which hadn't happened before. No intersex individual who was studying to become a psychologist had ever gotten to work with John Money. And I worked with him, and I did my dissertation with him. I learned everything there was to know at that time about intersex people, intersex psychology, intersex treatment. At Hopkins, I met some of the people who wrote the first protocols for everything from surgery to hormonal treatment to genetic testing for intersex people. So I became very rapidly as much of an expert on this as anybody on the planet, because I was voracious. I could not get enough of that information as quickly as I possibly could.
My mom bought her a Cinderella costume, and I remember being so angry that my mom bought her that, and thinking, saying to her, like, what are you doing? You're making this so much more difficult. I'm trying to guide this kid and like help him so that he'll have an easier life. I thought, and so that became okay, and then it just was like moving that line a little bit to like, okay, well, you can't have a dress, but you can have a costume. Okay, well, you can have the dress, but you have to wear it at home. Okay, well, you can wear the dress, but you can't wear it anywhere but the store. It was like just kind of moving things along, and like eventually it became a real issue, and we were getting ready to go to Disneyland, which was like our place, and it was her 10th birthday, and I thought, well, this will be the perfect opportunity to allow her to wear all the things in a place where nobody knows us, and maybe she'll get it out of her system. And so we went, and I bought all these girl clothes, and she got to wear, be herself, wear all the things that she dreamt of wearing. But we got out there, and it was like all of a sudden we didn't really consider all of the other factors. Like, well, what name were we going to call her, and how were we going to use different pronouns? I had never even considered that possibility. And how was I going to respond to people who thought this was my daughter, and was I going to call her my daughter? And there was just so many things came up, and it ended up being a really scary time instead of what we thought was going to be a really exciting time. And when we got back from that vacation, she was just gone. There was just no more light in her eyes. It was very sad.
The days leading up to that, this had been going on for quite a while. This just happened to be a culmination of evil where people said, I can't take it anymore. I can't take any more shit. Okay, a few days earlier, I was walking back from down West 4th Street near the university, and I was just me, Judy. I could pass, and I stopped in a gay club there to say hello to somebody, and 3 police officers came in, and they came over to me, and I was like shaking, because if you've ever been beaten up or arrested by the police, see, I looked better than I was not in a beauty pageant, but I was in my day job. I had on 2-piece suits, heels, and a shoulder bag. And my hair was down to here, but I kept my hair conservative. No wigs. And they said, "What are you doing in here?" I said, "I'm waiting to see a friend of mine." And he said, "Get out of here. You're not welcome here. Get out." The police officer did. He basically took me to the door, and he slammed the door and locked it. And walking down West 4th Street, going back to Christopher, all I could hear was screaming and crying. They were beating up the gay guys inside the club. See, stuff like that. And the number of people killed, I don't think were ever accounted for. They could beat you to death and you'd never see it in the newspaper or on television, because we didn't really matter. We were expendable.
So we already had, I think, like the thing with this project that I find so fascinating is that we already had laws in the books that were really progressive, and the laws and the statutes around harassment and anti-harassment statutes, bullying. So we already had codes in Nevada statutes saying sex, gender diverse persons, LGBTQ, right? And still, I think the enforcement part of it was what's missing, and then also the educational component that comes with when you create new laws, right?
I'm never going to remember how this is, but we started meeting before group eventually. Maybe it was a year later, maybe it was just several months later. Couldn't have been that much later, after starting this in the spring of '98. And in those meetings, we would sort of talk about, because I wanted to have a separation. I wanted group to be personal, and I wanted a space to have that we could talk about kind of activisty stuff or social change or whatever. Somebody that I knew in Reno was like, "Jane, we should start a nonprofit. There's this thing called Equality, the Equality Federation. We should be Equality Nevada. We should do this stuff." And I was kind of day drunk, drinking martinis, because that was we were done finally. And I was like, yeah, we'll do that. And but it stayed with me, and over the next few days, it started to grow a little bit in me. And we started out with this Equality Nevada thing, and that crumbled quickly. It was sort of maybe inability for people to sustain healthy relationships. But then coming away from that, I guess I had kind of gotten the bug about doing this, and then people had started to step forward to support these things. And then, so by early 2012, late 2011, we had maybe organized sufficiently so that we could submit paperwork to the IRS. And I remember talking about what we would have as a name, and I was really grateful that people were kind of going along with gender justice, it needed to be something that was about justice. I tried to do this along the way to add sex to it. I wasn't thinking in those ways back then, and I would have called it sex, gender justice, but it was we had no idea what we were doing, but we knew what we wanted to do, if that makes sense. And I'd always thought of us as sort of like a ragtag band of trannies was how I would just say it. But then we sort of took this step into nonprofit land. So there were many years and a lot of people who, I don't know, didn't even live. Some of them didn't live to see these things who were involved.
And I remember her telling me one day, "I'm just a freak. No one's ever gonna love me. I'm never gonna be happy as a boy or a girl." And And I thought, well, okay, clearly what I'm doing is not working. So I started looking for resources at that time, and there was like nothing in our community back then. There was like nobody to help us. And I would call people and they would be so ignorant and say the worst things. And I was just trying to find a therapist that would like be affirming, you know, that would help her, not somebody that was going to try to control her or make her into something that she wasn't. And I knew like from that first phone call that Jane was like going to be my person, because they were just so, they just knew all the things, you know, all the things that I needed to know.
I'm deeply proud of the things that we have done. I am privileged every day to have been allowed to play some role in those things. I think in the lives of individuals there has been inspiration, like a sense of belonging, even for a moment, which is life-changing. In lives where that doesn't happen, that spark of we did this or we can do this, I think is eternal. It is beyond. Those are the things that I take with me. The encounters, the sort of the groups, the like kind of the discussions, the togetherness.
I fought so I wouldn't just be another statistics. I fought so I would have the right to be exactly where I want and to be who I am now in person or as a person.
The Spirit of Stonewall is at the Las Vegas Trans Pride Center, and we hope to focus on how far we've come. And by focusing back on how bad what we've lived through, I know there's others that are older than me. We'll find them if we can. But I'll be 77 in September. But what we want to do is focus on getting the same struggles and hopes for the future that we had at Stonewall into the Las Vegas Trans Pride Center. There we can create more programs and be able to help more people and create a better community through unity involvement.
Most of you probably know me, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is John Brocious, and I'm a plastic surgeon here at UNLV School of Medicine, and I'm also the founder and director of the Gender Surgery Program.
It's wonderful.
I have to say that I'm very proud of the medical community. When I first came to town a few years ago, I wanted to provide gender care. There really wasn't a whole lot happening here. We had a couple of the OGs like Rob Phoenix doing the hormones, and some mental health professionals really just trying to do their best to kind of meet the demand.
So sexuality and gender are very different things. We have both. We encompass both of them. All of us have sexuality or asexuality, which is absence of attraction to folks, but we all are somewhere on the sexuality spectrum. That is one thing. And we all have gender identity. And sometimes we see some overlap with some of the labels, but gender identity is really how we see our masculinity, how we see our femininity, or you know, other identities, which there's a multitude, actually. I believe really infinite, get that right, infinite possibilities for gender identity. And then on top of that, we also have gender expression. And that's how we walk through the world. That's how we wear our clothes, our hair, our voices, all of those things are expression of how we see our gender.
They think it's a compliment when you say, when they come to you and say, well, you're always going to be such and such to me. No, if you can't accept me for who I am today, I don't want to always be something that I was yesterday, you know? And that's disrespectful, you know what I mean? Why would you want to call me something that I'm not, you know? And how are you gonna, I got all this handsomeness going on, you know? And how are you gonna say, well, you can always be that person that you were yesterday?
I have a service animal because of my depression. positioning has really messed with my head because of what I've gone through. And I'm a loner, I'm very depressed, and I get suicidal. And so I was prescribed a service dog that when I get going in my head, he'll distract me with my thoughts. So I go to him. Lay down. Lay all the way down. Good boy.
Well, religion's mostly used to hurt people in our community, especially from the evangelicals and conservatives. Most of the people in the LGBTQ community almost want nothing to do with church, and my thing is why I pursued ordination and kept my calling that God gave me is I wasn't going to let people rob me of my spirituality. If there was one thing I was going to keep, that was my spirituality, my relationship with my God.
I felt there was a need for help here for the girls, but no one had ever helped the girls. So they just have not given the services that we need. They will not do any outreach teams specifically for trans. They may have programs, but they won't do the outreach. And most of the girls where I come from, there's hundreds and hundreds of girls that live here, trans women. But these organizations would not go out there and do any outreach for them. I've had to do it myself on Christmas Eve, Thanksgiving Eve. I just did it last year. I paid money to get packets to take out there to the homeless girls, at least, the trans women. And there's a serious need for that. They just, for some reason, I don't know why, no one would do it. I put in requests. I've had meetings with people, like the head top people, they still won't do it. So by starting the Fabulous Life Skills Program, I felt maybe I could be used as the link between the two, the daytime community services available and the nightlife. There is a serious problem with that. Anyone can go down to the center, which is mostly just regular LGBT, well, without most trans, but not that particular population, trans prostitutes. It seems like the center or any of those places, they just don't want to reach out to them. They did not do it. Even when I was back in 2008, they wouldn't do it. I requested twice in the last year, they wouldn't do it. So I moved my program back to Gender Justice, which is an organization that does fight for us.
In the Black community specifically, it is okay for a gay person to be a hairdresser or a choir person or anything that's effeminate, which is how I struggle with my identity because I don't check any of those boxes. I am one of or both or all of.
Even though some people be like, oh, I'm okay with you being gay or you being this, but just don't hit on me or don't do this. And I'm like, okay, then you're not really comfortable, but you're tolerating it. I feel like that's how it is right now. And it's starting to get better every year. I mean, we still have a long way to go, I feel like, but right now it is getting better as the years go by. Especially with the more younger generation, I feel like they're more open to change and they're more open-minded than the people before us.
And we had this conversation all the way home, and we decided that, okay, she was going to get to be herself and wear what she wanted to wear and express herself in a way that felt authentic for her at school. But I really didn't have any idea what that was going to mean. And so I called the school the next morning and I talked to the principal and went down and had a meeting with her, and she looked at me like I had two heads when I said that my child was transgender, and started talking about what it might be like to use a different name in class, and what could we do about her PE class, and what could we do about the locker room. She was in 6th grade at the time. She was going to school with all of these kids that she had been in elementary school with, and so it was the kind of the beginning of this process of working with school to try to figure out what it might look like and how we would address her needs.
I believe I am everything that is underrepresented in our country and in this time. And it's time that we show ourselves, show up, take space, and be visible. Make sure that children and younger generation feel represented and feel that they're not alone.
The truth is that 80 to 90% of people either are in total support of supporting gender diverse students or just don't care either way. It doesn't affect them. They're not really concerned about it. And I think there's that small 10 to 15% that just cannot allow other people to live as who they are, that feel that they are personally violated by other people having space to be authentic, and they have to just come out and make it their business to get in the way of other people having rights. And they believe that they're the majority, and they sure did say that, and they sure did believe that the district should have been listening to them. But in the end, we were successful because it was the right thing to do. We were on the right side of history. It was the right thing to do. There was no other choice because it was the law.
One Saturday morning at 6 a.m., I received a voicemail from a former colleague I hadn't spoken to in years. On my Facebook page, he had seen the support and love that I had for our child. And clearly, he decided to start off the day with this message.
The only reason your kid is transgender because you pushed them into it, you manipulative, sick, twisted, dysphoria, acting motherfuckers. Transgender is not an orientation. It is a sickness. You guys are going against the grain of God. You guys are against this evil. This is disgusting. You should never have a 12-year-old educated on sexual orientations. You guys are disgusting.
I found it so fascinating that so many members of the public, like community members, thought that it was a forum for passing this legislation, but the legislation was already passed and we were just having a conversation of how can we enforce this at schools, right? Fairly and equitably. So I think that, like in the work that I do, I think it's interesting that law is important, right? The way that it's written is important, but there's this indeterminacy between people who understand what the law is, if you're educated on it or not, but then how people experience it in their everyday lives and then whether or not it's enforced, right?
Yeah, I think that we got really tired really fast in waiting for the school district to get moving and to implement policy and do what was right. And so kind of focusing on how we might go the legislative route was the next kind of tool that we had in our toolbox. And I'm a mom. I don't have any experience in this. I'm not a lawyer. I've never dealt with any type of legislative process prior to this. But we had a lot of support, and we have wonderful people in our community that stood with us and that made this possible. And they listened. They listened to us, to the families. They listened to the people who were right there on the ground doing the work in the schools. And they figured out how we needed to write this law so that it would actually be effective when it was implemented. And, I think that is the way that we have to look at things. If you don't like the way that things are working, if there's a law that isn't in place to support you, then change the law. Then figure out how to pass a law that is going to address the needs that your community has.
Of course, now I'm a trans pastor, and I'm a trans pastor who loves everyone and accepts everybody.
But I think we're just starting to understand as a community that transness and gender diversity is very expansive, and it's a spectrum in and of itself. And so now identifying in this way, I'm very proud to be able to, and to find my own truth.
Thankfully, with my family now, I've told my parents about Kai, about my son and his transition, and they've been very supportive.
People as transgender people, or people of trans experience, or people under that umbrella, we're not your punching bags. We're not your sex workers. We're not those, just whatever you feel like you want us to be.
From my experience, and the experience of some of my cutie pies, there's always been that line of the gays and the trans, or the gay doesn't want to work with the trans, or are not very accepting of the trans community.
What needs to change is, especially in our own community, I feel like there needs to be more inclusivity. Like even though, our community is all about love and, everybody's treated equal, everyone should be equal, blah, blah, blah. I feel like we're still like divided, like, if that makes sense. Like, it's still kind of judgmental within our own community. Like, for example, there is gay people that are still internally, like, how would you say, like homophobic within themselves and transphobic. Like there's gay guys that, you know, they don't like trans girls, or they don't, you know, or they don't like to talk to them. But it's like, okay, well, like we're all in the same community, so I feel like we should all just get along and stick together instead of like divide each other.
That everybody's accepted for who they are, especially the intersex. You know, there's a lot of there's a lot of work that still needs to be done there.
When you see people come together at gay pride parades, everybody realizes if we don't organize, if we don't become a group that demands rights, we're always going to be kept down. So we come together when we're looking to be able to get rights from the mainstream.
And if we can't work together as human beings, and I you know, I look at people as human beings. I don't classify them by sex or by race or anything else, because we're all just human beings. And the kids growing up today, oh, it's going to be so much better, because the kids today are more forceful. We were, in my day, we were just scared.
Ever since I came out in Las Vegas, it has been such a heartwarming experience for me and my family. Nevada has so many protection laws to protect me and the gender diverse community here. The gender diverse community here is full of amazing, encouraging, and inspiring people and affirming families who are here to support me. I can use the appropriate restroom without being bullied or having any issues. I'm treated just like any other kid, and that's exactly how it should be.
Encircle is a really incredible organization. Our mission is to bring the family and the community together to help LGBTQ youth and young adults thrive. We do that in a few different ways. Our centers do have drop-in hours each day, normally between the hours of about 3:30 and 8 o'clock. So our kids can come in, do their homework, connect with their friends, and just have a really safe space where they can exist and be themselves and not have to worry about it. And know that everybody in the house as well is here to support them too. We also do a lot of other activities, daily programming throughout the week, things like art therapy, music therapy, creative writing, anything to give these youth an opportunity to express themselves for who they truly are. There's a lot of other things that will be happening here in Las Vegas as well. We're gonna have a beautiful garden outside. We have an amazing backyard where we can host events with our families. Again, with that mission to bring everybody together. Our motto here at Encircle is no sides, only love. So we're just excited to welcome people through these doors and start to make a difference in the lives of these kids.
If what we want as a society is more love and acceptance, it's going to take some pretty monumental shifts in the hearts and minds of others. And the way you do that, the way you truly help people to grow and evolve, is by helping them to know people who are actually dealing with whatever struggle it is you want to change their hearts and minds about. By getting to know my child, by getting to know our family, it helps people to see that they don't have anything to be afraid of. There's nothing to be worried about. My child using the gender appropriate restroom and having public accommodation is zero threat to your child. I think that's incredibly important, because the good news is, just like bigotry and hatred and homophobia and transphobia are learned, love and acceptance can be learned as well.
I'm running for office because when I moved out here in 2004, I lived not far from where these film studios are. And at that point, my son was born and brought home to one room, no bedroom apartment on Fremont Street, East Fremont, east of Maryland. And in the 17 years that have gone on since then, while I've moved forward, while my son's moved forward, and while his mother's moved forward through different struggles and challenges, I realized that the progress that we've achieved has been left behind for so much of the city. It has nothing to do with gender. It has something to do with equity and fairness throughout every part of our community.
So we need more people in our community to run for office. We really need that to happen in Las Vegas. for our community to step up and not be afraid to run for office, because that's what's going to make a difference. The more we get out and start becoming viable for ourselves, we need more of our own community to support one another in different businesses. Because there's plenty of options for the gay community, for the lesbian community. There's not much option for the trans community as far as places to go to. And that's part of the reason of reopening the Las Vegas Trans Pride Center.
It's only the beginning.
Today is a very exciting day that we have our trans center here of Southern Nevada. And we've always had the Center for LGBTQ Services here at Southern Nevada, but sometimes the transgender community gets a little bit left out when they're lumped in with the LGBTQ. So something that's dedicated to the transgender community. They're my people. My heart is with that population. It's so important to be here today to support that.
I am Nevada Governor Steve Sisolak, and it's a pleasure really to be here with you today. Thank you to everyone from the Las Vegas Trans Pride Center for inviting me and Kathy here today to join in this important grand opening and ribbon cutting. I want to take just a moment to talk about the importance of this center, as it stands as a beacon of hope for the transgender community in Las Vegas and beyond.
That we have never had a governor in Nevada before who cares so much about making the policies of government apply to everyone. And he says 3 million Nevadans, he means all Nevadans, not just some Nevadans. And
Only a few years, Las Vegas now, between a network of UNLV providers and community providers, we pretty much have every surgical and medical service that you could want, whether that's facial surgery, chest surgery, top surgery, bottom surgery, pediatric endocrinologists for hormone blockers, as well as a whole slew of mental health professionals. So there's not that many actually cities in the world really that can boast that they offer this many services. So I'm really proud of that. We're not quite there yet. There's still a lot more fight to go on. It's still an everyday fight with the insurance companies. It's still an everyday struggle to kind of teach some of our other colleagues to how to be affirming to our patients and how to learn kind of the latest and greatest care for the gender expansive community. And for the future, really, it's my job as an educator to teach the medical students and my trainees some of these techniques or how to be affirming. So that way the next generation knows how to care for the gender expansive community the way that we want to.
Nevada just became the 6th state in the country to start including LGBTQ curriculum when we're talking about history. It's very important for us to know our history because then we have more pride in who we are and we know our own power. So
Nevada is rated as the #1 state for LGBTQ+ community. I think that the community is working so hard so that everyone can feel represented and we all get equal rights.
17 years ago, Las Vegas was a very conservative city. And in some ways it still is. However, we can walk the streets now without risk of being ridiculed or mocked because of some of the great leadership that has taken place in the last 17 years under the tutelage of the LGBTQIA+ community that has sprouted up in the last decade and a half.
You don't have to understand gender identity or even why someone would struggle with their gender. All you have to understand is that that individual and their loved ones know what is best for their lives. My trans child's existence is zero threat to your child's existence.
It's never been just me. And that I am here talking about these things doesn't say anything about, like, I did this. It just means that I'm here talking about these things. Because there are a lot of people who are not here and who can't talk. And they were just as much involved and important.
I would love to see a day, and I think we're getting there, where the norm is that people say who they are and people don't question it, and people don't say, well, that's not valid.
The gender diverse students of today will be the accepted members of the community tomorrow, regardless of when they came out, regardless of how they present, and regardless of their pronouns or their gender identification.
My hopes are equality, acceptance, not being told you don't belong here, opportunity, be it playing sports where they want to play sports, being able to do what they want to do. I want them to have every opportunity at life that every other person in this world has.
But my hope for the kids is for them just to be who they are, accept who they are sooner than later.
It's really okay. And that there's a generation that's just like, no, this is the kind of people we want to be. We want people to be themselves. We want people to embrace everybody, to make everybody feel included, everybody feel special. That's interesting and so amazing to see. And in 20 years, if we don't even have to have these conversations because it'll just be, that'll be even better to see, because then it won't be a news, like every time somebody comes out, somebody's like, I'm bi or I'm whatever. It won't be a thing. It'll just be like, oh, okay, that's cool.
My name is Catalina Enriquez, and I just won Miss Nevada USA 2021, the first trans woman to compete in the Miss USA system. I am so happy, and I hope that I've inspired so many people, including the younger generation, to be yourself, that regardless of your differences, you can be absolutely amazing and have a successful path in life.
Congratulations to our new Miss Nevada USA, Catalina Enriquez! She and her team will go on to represent Nevada at the Miss USA pageant. Live this year in Tulsa, Oklahoma at Paradise Cove Theater, November 29th. Let's give a huge round of applause for our newly crowned queen.
More people
We have
running for state
arrived.
senators.
The trans women have arrived. We're here.
The dreams you have for your child are beautiful, but the dreams that they have for themselves are even more magnificent. Our job as parents is to support and train our children to be the leaders of tomorrow. And thankfully, in Las Vegas, they have many, many examples who have been blazing trails for generations before our family ever knew we would need it.